Early in the 19th century, America had essentially no knowledge for treatment of the mentally ill, who were typically housed in prisons or under the insufficient supervision of their relatives. If treatment was given, it was like other therapies used at that period in medicine, such as purgatives and bloodletting. Since there wasn't much information available at the time on mental health, speculating about it might have even implied dementia. It was simpler to label someone as mad or crazy than conduct a thorough scientific analysis of them. The list of reasons why a person could be admitted to a mental asylum were as varied as laziness and even being kicked in the head by a horse. In reality, insane asylums were rather prisons where patients were content as their families were unwilling or unable to take care of them. Was there another reason these mental asylums existed? Could they have been used for more than simply housing the lunatics and crazy people of that time? What if some were used to completely reprogram an unsuspecting society? Some online researchers and speculators have developed a theory that these institutions had a darker and more insidious purpose. What do we know about the cultural reset of the 1800s and the connection to insane asylums? Worldwide, some of the most architecturally notable insane asylums include the Bethlehem Royal Hospital, Britain, also known as Bedlam; Ipswich Hospital, Australia, for the insane; Danvers State Lunatic Asylum in Massachusetts, and Agnews Residential Facility in California, to name a few. Unknown diseases could have contributed to some people's so-called insanity as well. In addition to the fact that many people claim to descend from an ancient kingdom, which for part of society indoctrinated by a questionable narrative, this was a clear sign of madness. It is taken for granted that, at the beginning and throughout the 1800s, there was no clear consensus of what mental health was or should be. So we can assume that being a healthy person was limited to acting according to the norms of social behavior. This is what most understood as not being crazy. By the end of the 19th century, national systems of regulated asylums for the mentally ill had been established in most industrialized countries. At the turn of the century, Britain and France combined had only a few hundred people in asylums. But by the end of the century, this number had risen to the hundreds of thousands. The United States housed 150,000 patients in mental hospitals by 1904. Germany housed more than 400 public and private sector asylums. These asylums were critical to the evolution of psychiatry as they provided places of practice throughout the world. Doctors, and especially ordinary people, did not understand what caused erratic or manic behaviors. So, there was no way to differentiate a person who really represented a danger to himself and society from one who had something different, and it would not be a medical issue. What if some people's insanity was simply a misdiagnosis of a distant memory of a previous society? Could these people have been reprogrammed to forget about their past? Mental asylums were at first a kindness to protect the sick from the world that would otherwise kill them. Within the theory of the cultural reset of the 1800s, we find that many of the asylums that were around the world and that would house all those who did not follow social norms used to be, in the remote past, buildings of a previous empire. As part of consolidating the reset, controllers separated the surviving families of the last world catastrophe that occurred. Perhaps they were moved around to different parts of the world or country after a great disaster such as a mud flood. It must be remembered that mud flood was most likely caused by planetary-scale events such as super earthquakes or meteorite impacts, specifically in areas of rivers, valleys, and swamps. The theory claims that families that were indeed of previous lineage were to be systematically destroyed. Adults would be sent to newly discovered asylums where they would be essentially imprisoned and possibly psychologically affected in order to erase as much of their memories as possible. Online researchers claim that children would be sent to different parts of countries, far from home, or even to other countries, with new identities to forget their cultural heritage. Adults who were more reluctant to forget their past could be subject to mental reprogramming. The asylums themselves, being of old world origin, possessed special qualities that controllers intentionally used to induce certain states of consciousness in people, perhaps even intended for people suffering from dementia or any other unidentified mental imbalance. The other blatantly obvious note is that these immense, insane asylums nearly look identical all around the world in what they call Gothic and Roman architecture. As the theory suggests by various online speculators, incredible as it may seem, ultimately the insane people were returned to the streets. There was supposedly a plan to finish getting them out of the way, disconnecting the people from their pasts. Supposedly, after the task at hand was complete, mental asylums inexplicably fell into disuse. It is worth mentioning that many of these mental asylums were buildings that looked partially submerged in the earth, as if in fact the ground level had buried an entire floor of the buildings and cities. Another main theme is most of these structures became overcrowded up through the beginnings of the 20th century, so more asylums were needed. Yet the population numbers at the time do not justify the immense size of the buildings or number of people they claim were committed. In California, at the very onset of the California Gold Rush of 1849, we see several insane asylums said to be erected to house those deemed insane, as early as 1851. Even though California's population in no way justified the immense size and scope of these structures, it's fair to ask yourself a few questions at this point. Were these complex mental asylums, of which, in many cases, there is no record of their foundation, and they seem to have an entire floor buried in the earth, were they built only by inexperienced men who pulled their resources with horses and carts? And even if it is possible, then they just let them fall into disuse. Some were remodeled through history as museums and other tourist attractions, many more demolished. Could it be that every century or so, society goes through a cultural reset that we collectively forget about? Were these asylums used to reprogram an entire generation to forget about a hidden past? We may never know the full story. Stay tuned for more next time. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up icon. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notifications for new videos.